In the summer of 1969, two countries played a World Cup qualifier. 3 weeks later, their fighter planes were shooting each other out of the sky. Real bombs, real airports, thousands dead, over a football match. They call it the Football War, the only war in history named after a sport. The planes were leftover World War II fighters, and their last duel became the final propeller dogfight ever. And almost nobody noticed, because that same week, something was happening above them. We'll get to that. But first, how did a referee's whistle become an air raid siren? It started June 8, 1969, when El Salvador's team landed in Honduras, and a mob laid siege to their hotel all night long. June 8, 1969. Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras. El Salvador's national team has flown in for the first leg of a World Cup qualifier. Win this round, and you're 2 steps from the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, the biggest stage on the planet. The Salvadoran players go to bed early. Big match tomorrow. They do not sleep, because outside their hotel, Honduran fans have organized what can only be described as a siege. All night long, rocks against the windows, firecrackers, car horns, hundreds of people screaming, banging pots, leaning on horns until sunrise. This was an actual tactic. Keep the visiting team awake all night, and they'll play like zombies tomorrow. It worked. Honduras wins 1-0. And in El Salvador, people lose their minds. There are reports of fans setting fire to the stadium. 1 week later, it's the second leg in San Salvador. And the Salvadoran fans have been waiting. What the Honduran team experienced that week makes the hotel siege look like a lullaby. Riots outside their hotel. People died in them. And on match day, in front of a packed stadium, the organizers raised, not the Honduran flag, a filthy rag in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans. El Salvador wins 3-0. Nobody remembers the football, because across Honduras that night, mobs turned on the 300,000 Salvadoran immigrants living there. Beatings, burned homes, families fleeing with whatever they could carry. Hold on, 300,000 immigrants? Why were 1/10 of Honduras's population Salvadoran? Remember that question. It's the actual key to this entire war, and it's the part everyone gets wrong. The series is tied. 1 win each. And in 1969, there's no away goals rule, so it comes down to a third match, a playoff on neutral ground. Mexico City, June 26th. It might be the most tense football match ever played. Extra time. Back and forth. Final score, El Salvador 3, Honduras 2. El Salvador is going to the World Cup. And that same day, El Salvador's government formally cuts all diplomatic ties with Honduras. The official statement accuses Honduras of nothing less than genocide against the Salvadorans fleeing across the border. 12,000 of them in the days after the second match alone. Read that timeline again. Qualified for the World Cup and severed diplomatic relations. Same day. Football and geopolitics had fully merged into one screaming feedback loop. Then it gets kinetic. July 3rd. Salvadoran anti-aircraft guns open fire on a plane in Honduran airspace. Border troops clash. Mortar fire. Diplomats from 3 neighboring countries are begging both sides to calm down. And on July 14th, 1969, at 6 o'clock in the evening, El Salvador stops pretending. Salvadoran P-51 Mustangs, the legendary American fighter planes from World War II, bought secondhand, scream across the border and bomb Honduran airfields, including the international airport of the capital city. Behind them, cargo planes and civilian aircraft with bombs literally shoved out of the doors by hand. At the same moment, the Salvadoran army pours across the border on two fronts, with tanks supported by, I promise this is real, bulldozers and farm trucks wrapped in improvised armor plating. A war had started over football, hadn't it? No. And this is where the story everyone tells gets it wrong. Football didn't cause this war, any more than a spark causes the gas leak. Here's what was actually underneath. El Salvador was tiny, overcrowded, and desperate. 3.5 million people crammed into a country where just 5% of landowners controlled 70% of the land. 200,000 peasants own nothing at all. Next door, Honduras, 5 times bigger with fewer people. So for decades, poor Salvadorans did the obvious thing. They crossed the border looking for land and work. By 1969, 300,000 of them. There's your answer from earlier. Then Honduras, under pressure from its own wealthy landowners, including the giant American-owned United Fruit Company, which controlled 1/10 of the country, passed a land reform law and aimed it almost entirely at Salvadoran immigrants. Land they'd farmed for decades, confiscated, families expelled, thousands of people stripped of everything, and marched back to a homeland that had no room for them. That was the bomb. It had been armed for years. The 3 football matches were just the match dropped on it. 2 governments, both military dictatorships, both drowning in domestic problems, both delighted to point their angry populations at the neighbors instead. The football was never the reason. The football was the excuse. The war itself lasted about 100 hours. 4 days. But what a deranged 4 days. Honduras struck back with its own World War II museum pieces. F-4U Corsairs, the gull-winged fighters from the Pacific Theater. They bombed El Salvador's oil facilities and wiped out 20% of its fuel reserves. And on July 17th, over the border, Corsairs and Mustangs met in the sky and fought the last dogfight between propeller aircraft in human history. Planes built to fight Hitler and Imperial Japan. 25 years past their war, dueling over a World Cup qualifier. A Salvadoran captain named Guillermo Reynaldo Cortez died in that sky. On the ground, it was uglier. The Salvadoran army captured the Honduran town of Nueva Ocotepeque after artillery barrages sent civilians fleeing alongside retreating soldiers. The town's parish priest counted 400 bodies. CIA documents, declassified decades later, estimated up to 1,500 dead, most of them civilians. And here's the detail that breaks my brain. The world barely noticed any of it. Want to know why? On July 16th, 1969, 2 days into the war, Apollo 11 launched. Humanity was landing on the moon. Every camera, every headline, every eye on planet Earth was pointed at the sky. When Neil Armstrong took his first step, on July 20th, there were still Salvadoran soldiers standing on Honduran soil. One small step for man, while back on Earth, men were dying over a football match nobody was watching anymore. The ceasefire came after 100 hours. So who won? Nobody. Everybody lost, and they kept losing for decades. Over 100,000 Salvadorans were displaced, expelled from Honduras, or fleeing the war, straight back into the overcrowded landless pressure cooker that started everything. That social explosion helped detonate the Salvadoran Civil War. A decade later, 70,000 more dead. The two countries didn't sign a peace treaty until 1980, 11 years after the final whistle. Their border dispute wasn't fully settled until 1999, 30 years later. And El Salvador, the country that went to war in the same breath as qualifying for the World Cup, they went to Mexico in 1970, lost all 3 games, and scored 0 goals. All of it, the riots, the bombs, the dead, for 3 defeats and an early flight home. But here's the ending nobody expects. The players, the actual men who played those 3 poisonous matches, never hated each other. They knew what the politicians had done with their game. And in 2001, when earthquakes devastated El Salvador, the veterans of those exact 1969 teams, Hondurans and Salvadorans together, reunited and played charity matches to raise money for the victims. The men blamed for starting a war spent their old age using football to heal one. So this month, when you're watching the World Cup and a commentator says some match is war, remember that exactly once in history, that was literally true. And even then, it was never really about the football. Next up, the team that was ordered to lose a match by the Nazis and won anyway, knowing the price. That story is unbelievable, and it's coming. Subscribe so you don't miss it.